Okay, welcome back to the Movie Wheel Marathon. I'm Andrew. That's
Hello,
Mac,
I'm
and
Mac.
yes, you are. And sorry, I'm getting the ball rolling because I we need to talk
Okay,
about this one. We're
okay,
on
let's go.
Alien 3. We're in our
hmm
Alien marathon. We're knee deep
hmm
into it now. All right, and last episode that you of course remember, ladies and gentlemen,
Yes,
I
because
asked.
everyone
Yes,
consistently watches all of these
everyone
in
listens.
order. They
Everyone
they
watches
start
them
from
in
the very
order.
beginning and go all
It's
the way to the
called a
end.
marathon, Mac. You have to watch them in order. Of course they do. But I asked Mac at the end of Aliens, such
I
a good
know,
movie, such a great
I know.
sci-fi movie, what she thought the next step would be and what she
hmm
didn't want to happen in this movie.
hmm
Real quick, I'm sorry. I had my phone and I already forgot. Directed by David Fincher. Release date May 22nd, 1992. Budget of, you know what? We'll get to that because I'm going to talk about that later. So, how did we, Mac, dear friend,
Yeah.
think of this movie?
Well,
What do we
since
think?
you
How do we
mentioned
feel?
it, I don't remember everything I said about stuff I didn't want to happen, but I know I said I don't want Newt to die and I don't want Ripley to die. Guess what
Mm-hmm.
happens?
Guess what happens? Guess what happens in the first 5 minutes?
Oh man, that was tough. Honestly, I think I was more upset by the Newt death than I was by Ripley's, simply because you have time to prepare for Ripley's.
Yeah,
Newt's was just like a Ripley's the only survivor, and I was like,
yeah,
what?
yeah,
No, she's not.
yeah,
No, they're not gonna do that.
yeah,
They did.
yeah.
And I do wonder if it's largely because they didn't want to bring a 12-year-old girl into the story they were telling with this all men's colony thing. So I kind of understand the choice,
That's
but it
not
was
why.
it was it wasn't great. Oh, really?
No.
Is it
So
an actor thing?
no, we will get to all that. I'm gonna okay. Let me say up
Okay.
front so you can understand what I meant before, and just so the audience understands. I am going to kind of rip off Mr. Sunday movies a little bit more this episode. In
Okay.
that, a lot of the things we're going to discuss are actually more behind the scenes and some trivia info
Hmm.
because we need to talk about it. I do love Mr. Sunday movies. I'm not going to plagiarize his video, and I'm not going to maintain this formula. It's just
Well, you could also include like a link in our
I
description
might,
if you
yeah, I
wanted
might do
to, just
that
to be
because
like,
of course his breakdown is going to be
um.
better. He's a real YouTuber. I love his stuff. It's
So if
just
you're listening then to this, just
just go
close this
listen to
video, go
his. Yeah,
straight to
just
the
don't listen to
description.
this. Just go listen to that one. It's just a lot of his structure of his videos always includes like information from the IMDb trivia page, and a lot of what
Okay.
I need to bring up for our conversation is going to come from there. So
hmm
first, though, ignoring any of that because that will poison the well. I think that might not be
Mm.
entirely accurate to this particular conversation, but the
hmm
sentiment is there. We should talk about the movie as is, and
hmm
because it's, I would say, real quick, not that great. We probably won't be here all that long. So towards the end, I'm gonna get into some behind the scenes stuff. So with none of that knowledge, let's
Yeah.
discuss the movie as is. I agree that the choice to kill off Newt and Bishop and Hicks is just the kind word I could put is ignorant. It undercuts everything about the last movie. The whole
Yeah.
final mission of the last movie was going to save Newt. And it was so
Mhm.
impactful because, you know, if you go into the lore a little bit, you find out that Ripley lost her daughter, and this is like her new surrogate adopted daughter. And to kill her
Mhm.
off immediately, and to kill Hicks off
Yeah.
immediately, that's just why. Like I
It's
we
also
could
disappointing from a general standpoint of just like, okay, sure, the structure of the first film was essentially like The Last Scroll, right? Everyone else dies. There's only one survivor of this terrible encounter, and whether or not people will believe her about what happened is kind of up in the air because of how ridiculous it sounds. Like that's a decent structure. Not my favorite structure for a film, like we talked about, but it's a solid idea. And then in the second one, they kind of follow the same pattern, but they allow for more survivors. And it feels like this film can't accept the idea that there were more survivors and wants to force it down to just one person again. So we have that, like, the fact that maybe she's just crazy. She's
Mm-hmm.
totally on her own, right? And it would have been like, I mean, I was thinking mostly of Newt when I noticed everybody died, but now thinking back about the plot of the film, having Bishop and or Hicks there would have been really interesting
Mm-hmm.
in this story.
Yeah.
And they just kill them so they don't have to worry about them and can tell their own version of an aliens movie, which is kind of lazy,
Yeah.
honestly.
I agree. I also just feel like this is such a weird place to take the movie. And
Hmm.
I I'll try to remain like concise here because this could turn into a ramble and I don't necessarily want it to just yet, honestly. It's just in the the depth of worlds and stories you can take an adventure in space and to be on a prison planet with a bunch of lice covered religious criminals. Like look, I'm
Hmm.
a godless heathen and I get that. There are stories in which faith and religion are very much, I think, like for one, warranted. They bring value to the story, and it's inspiring or it's significant. My first thought is just Life of Pi. I love Life of Pi. I love that journey, and I love the connection and the relationship with God slash gods. This doesn't feel like anything. It doesn't feel necessary. It
Yeah,
makes it feel
no.
weird to go from space adventure with monster on space station to space adventure with more space monsters on alien planet to prison planet with weird religious horny bald men. Like what? I'm sorry. What? Where
Yeah.
did this
It
come? It would almost make more sense if there were Wookiees, and that wouldn't make any sense at all. But at least that's got some sort of more space vibe. Like, am I out of place here, or am I making
no,
sense?
since we're here, it's kind of worth mentioning, like, okay, so starting first with like the religious notes of this group of men. um the idea of crash landing in like a male colony or like prison, and
That's such a
like
choice
that
as
element.
well. Like that's such a
Yeah, okay,
choice.
so, well, okay, I'm getting like
I'm
three
not
steps away from what I'm
I'm
trying
not
to
gonna
say,
talk. I should
but
stop. Just you do you. You do you.
double Y isn't a thing. Anyway, moving to just the setup of the whole thing, it's kind of like, okay, so obviously putting Ripley, like a lone female, in an all male prison is inherently a dangerous situation for her. And maybe it's kind of playing on the themes of body horror with the alien, maybe a little bit. So like I'm trying to give it some credit for that, but it's not, it doesn't feel like it's done well. And then to impose a cult like religion on these guys exclusively, it seems, to keep them in line, and then to play up those religious like keywords and tones so heavily. I mean, like, Dylan is almost a spiritual leader for the
Hmm.
guys, but the only thing you really ever see him doing is talking about how terrible everybody is and beating up people while still somehow holding like a sense of honor because he's also the one you can rely on the most.
Right.
Like,
It's
it
sorry. I'm
it's a
not talking.
complex character that's interesting, but I don't know that it works with what they're trying to do with the religion aspect particularly. Because it's pretty clear that the religion is only really used to control the guys, and so it doesn't really work well in an alien sci-fi story. They also make a really big effort to make the entire thing feel like it's old and ancient and underground.
Hmm.
Sure, we still have some sci-fi like settings, but the like we have some stained glass in the background. They don't have any weapons. All they have is fire, which is essentially like little torches going through tunnels. You know, it takes you back to like these medieval days rather than being this fun sci-fi romp with big futuristic rifles and like mech suits that allow you to fight giant
Seriously.
bio
Yeah.
aliens. Instead, we just have like throw
Nice.
fire at the monster and run away. And
Yeah.
it gets kind of Terminator mechanic factory-ish at the very end. But I mean, even in this one, we don't really have an android. I was convinced for the longest time that Clemens was going to be an android. I was
Mm,
sold. I would have put money on it. I'm not a betting person. But he ended up being human in the end. His arc is something that I'm kind of frustrated about generally, but
we'll
that's
come to
fine.
it. We'll come to it.
So the whole thing, all this long-winded bit, basically boils down to I agree with you. I don't think the religion here is used well at all. I think you're right that religion, even in sci-fi stories, can be a super interesting aspect
Yes.
of your world building. But in this case, it's literally just used as a controlling mechanism. And
Uh-huh.
if you're going to do that, just put futuristic chips in their neck that buzz them when they do something bad, right?
Sure.
Like, it's so much better because
There's
the religion isn't used here.
yes, to skip ahead two movies to Alien Covenant. The captain or the eventual captain of the Covenant is a religious person, and that causes conflict
Mhm,
in like in an
mhm.
interesting way. It's also, of course, the Covenant. Like there's
Right.
interesting parallels there. Like they
Parallels.
do something with it. It feels like it's a part. There's a line when the warden Andrews is talking about the update, talking about Ripley, and one guy is like, I've taken a vow of celibacy. All of us have. My first thought to that was like, did you have a fucking choice?
Yeah.
You're on
Uh-huh.
a deserted prison planet. Was that really a choice you're making? Is it?
Yeah.
Is it really? So I just and I hadn't considered as much, but you are absolutely right to put this on a planet like this as well. It's just why this that's I think if I were to honestly, other than killing off Newt and Hicks right away, my biggest issue with this movie is I think it's boring. I just don't find it nearly as interesting. It's also to go from Alien to rightly titled Aliens and to end with fighting a queen, and we're the whole movie we're dealing with one xenomorph that's kind of sickly looking because it came out of a dog.
Mhm.
That's our monster for the whole movie. This is kind of lame, guys. This is kind of lame.
Well, yeah. It the pacing wasn't right either. I actually did find, and this is gonna be sacrilegious to the people who really like the Aliens franchise, but I kind of liked parts of this film more than I've liked other parts of the other two films because I felt like it was doing more with character. Like I really liked Ripley and Clement's interactions. I really liked the way their relationship was built. I like the fact that neither of them really trust the other, but they kind of had like a functioning relationship. Um, it kind of felt like where Hicks and Ripley were going at the end of our last film. So I feel like that's interesting. And I really like I wanted him to be an android so that we would force this sort of like extra level of drama in there. And like I don't feel like it would have been forced because we start with such a mystery about his background, right? Like he
Yeah.
doesn't want to share his background. And it's like to me the clues were it's because I mean, at one point, even it might have been a red herring, but at one point, the supervisor says, "I know what you are,"
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I was like, that feels like a clue, right? That feels like
Uh-huh.
foreshadowing. It's trying to tell the viewer that he's not human, but instead, it just ends up being that he was a abused drugs when he was a med student and saved a bunch of people's lives, but lost one of them, and that was enough to put him in prison. And then he just stayed in prison for the rest of his life because he felt like he connected to the
Yeah, I
inmates.
think I don't remember exactly what I said, but I think he caused the death of multiple people. But again, it was an accident, and also it's just I don't like when they do stuff like that in movies. They do something very similar in I think it's called The Spider Room. It was on Netflix. Chris Hemsworth, Miles Teller. But
Oh
like
yeah.
yeah, big dramatic history, horrible past. Can't talk about it for the whole movie. Then it's revealed, and it's like this isn't like compared to what you have set up, like so someone died because of an accident, because of negligence perhaps, and they're remorseful. You acted like they kept Pennywise in their backpack and let it loose in a school. Like this is not nearly as bad
Mhm.
as you've alluded to. So like what the
Mhm.
heck, man? what are you doing? Because I do agree. I like Clemens in general. I think he's cool, but it's like one of those things that's like this is cool in a different movie. Like this just
Hmm.
I can vibe with this given what we were presented with, but this still just doesn't feel like an alien movie. It's still kind of a boring movie.
Well, and I
I
think
like the actor a lot because he's got like a great. His voice is so good
yeah.
and his performance is so nice and his like the delivery is great. Like I'm intrigued by his character for sure, but if the most interesting thing about your alien movie is this guy's dynamic with Ripley and the dynamic is just
Okay, and
don't spend
again,
time with these
like
other guys, then it's kind of a letdown.
I mean, okay, well, point one is, yeah, this doesn't really feel like an alien movie, but I think that's kind of why I liked those scenes.
Mm.
So me, like, a part of my analysis of this film is this is a clear departure from the tradition of the Alien franchise because this scene, even though I enjoy it more than I enjoy the average Alien movie, does not belong in an Alien movie. But the second part where I was kind of going there is I'm gonna keep harping on this Clemens should have been an android thing because he keeps giving her like a mix of chemicals that he calls his secret cocktail.
Hmm.
And at the end, we find out he also in the beginning lets her know that because of the way she came out of like cryosleep or hypersleep, whatever they called it, she's going to be sick for a few weeks. Then at the end, we find out that she's housing a queen. And sure, maybe a queen just has like a longer gestation period or whatever. But what if he was an android who was aware of the fact that she was carrying one and was
Ah.
giving her a cocktail of drugs that would keep it more or less dormant but alive? And
Ooh.
he also had feelings for her as an
Oh.
android. Like, look how much
Interesting.
cooler that
Mac.
story is.
Oh, I like that. That's interesting for sure.
And it also doesn't require a 30-minute long chase scene through an incredibly
Oh my
confusing
god, I
maze
know.
of dark tunnels with a bad CGI alien. So
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know.
No,
At risk of
yeah.
sounding like a fool like we do every episode, this is maybe something I could have written better.
No, okay, you're absolutely right. And we are getting closer to that. We will talk about that very soon. Um so I'm trying to think if there's anything actually relevant to talk about. For one, the xenomorph emerging from the dog, way too big. Way too big.
Agreed. I noticed that too.
Like we get examples later on in future movies, which is totally fine, of xenomorphs can emerge from different species more fully developed. That's fine. It's just it was too big. Like it was
Like the mass of the alien doesn't fit in the mass
no,
of the
no, it
dog.
doesn't. Anyway, um, the lead covered alien is cool for all of like 3 seconds. Um,
Hmm.
there's a
I'm
joke.
not really sure that lead shatters like that, but it's fine.
Who knows,
Like
man? Who
hot lead
knows?
with cold water put on it. I don't think it explodes, but that's, I mean, I'm sure it damages it and it might even be brittle and break, but exploding while covering organic matter, I don't know.
Who's to say? Who's of all the things I get wrong in this movie, that's low on the list. Gosh. Do you have an opinion on whether or not that was really Wayland or if it was an android, the bishop at the end? That's been the cause of great internet debate. Apparently, there's a definitive answer, but it depends on which version of the movie you watch.
Hmm. It would be very like the company to send an android and then lie about him being an android. Um, the the biggest issue I see with that is the rule of robotics laid out in the previous film. Not that I don't believe that the company would circumvent those rules somehow, but according to Bishop in the last film, they cannot take actions that lead to the harm of a human being. And the actions that android, if it was an android, was taking would have led to Ripley's harm. So I don't that's not necessarily definitive, but it would kind of suggest that maybe it's not. That said, companies lying and skeevy, so I would totally believe that it was an android.
Yeah. So yeah, there's two schools of thought. Obviously, those two. Um, the argument for Android is that when his ear is ripped off, he doesn't seem to care as much as maybe one should. It also
Mm.
parallels how earlier in the movie, the first bishop's whole side of that same side of his head is ripped off. There's also he's credited in the movie as Bishop 2. However, when his ear gets cut off, it's clearly blood, and there's like novelizations of the movie that confirm he is a human. However, you could easily put red food coloring on whatever you want. Could easily be fake. So yeah, it's
Or you could even have a false face for the company.
exactly.
Like,
So I think because of whatever is definitively said in the canon, it's supposed to be a real guy. I think it makes way more sense that it should be like another android. There is also, this is not canon, I guess, but it is kind of confusing. Wayland shows up in one of the Alien versus Predators, which takes place in like 2005.
wait.
So
That doesn't make sense.
no, it doesn't. So it's not canon. Like the Alien versus Predator movies don't exist in the Alien movies. So xenomorphs exist in the Predator universe. If predators exist in the xenomorph universe, they don't show up in the movies. So yeah, it's a little all over the place. It's a weird decision, and it doesn't really seem to go anywhere. I don't know. I feel like there's just not enough that honestly happens in this movie that's worth talking about. There's so much weird prison back and forth ridiculousness that it's just not.
Yeah.
It's not.
There's a lot
fun.
of delays. Like at one point I wrote, it's another long dramatic conversation. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of like saving Ripley even after she knows that she has to die to make sure that the alien doesn't keep going. There's a lot of people who die to save her, which is annoying. There's gosh, I just side note. One of my other notes is that Clemens' name starts with a C, which would be a perfect progression of Ash, Bishop, Clemens, ABC. But whatever. Anyway, continuing.
Remember that.
Okay, I wasn't wrong about that. All right.
You were not wrong about that because you don't know what the next one is. But after Alien 4 is Prometheus, and our android's name is David. So you are right. You caught on to that. You have to keep an eye out for that in the next one. Anyway,
there's just a lot of things. Like they put a lot of effort into world building this prison, but because the prison is not like it doesn't really fit in the franchise super well, it doesn't work well for the film. I mean, again, like, were this its own thing, I would want it to focus way more on those aspects than on the alien aspect, but it's supposed to be an alien movie. So it should focus on the alien stuff.
Yeah.
And those, I mean, if you count up the scenes that were about the alien versus about something else entirely, it's probably 50-50, maybe even less than that for the alien. Like, it's also not centered.
Yeah, I feel like it's worth mentioning as well, and I almost forgot about this before we get into the other stuff. Just from a structural standpoint, what are you doing? Because you've put us on a planet with rapists and murderers and criminals. Are we supposed to care that they're dying? Like, we spend time with our space truckers. We see them interacting. We see that they're people. We spend time with our space marines. We see that they have, different motivations, different desires. Like they're kind of cool. We see their fear. We get to know them. We grow to appreciate them. We don't really get to do that with most of these guys. And the only one that really feels kind of sad when they go is Clemens. And that also, it's so, I feel like, anticlimactic. It's almost like you forget it happens because it's so out of nowhere. And then they just keep moving forward. Yeah. And then what's his name? Dylan? Then he dies. And it's like, okay, that's notable because he's the only other like really notable character here. But, like, am I supposed to care about all these other guys? And Ripley has like a fun inspirational speech of like, hey, no one cares about us because it's the company. Down with the company. It's like, yes, okay, yes, but in this case, am I supposed to care about them? Like there's
That's interesting because this is a perfect mirror to my point in the first film about like how I don't feel like I can connect with the characters in the
right,
first film.
but this is
And
even
then when they
worse.
die, I don't feel like I care. In
Uh-huh.
this one, my suggestion then was to turn up the gore. Like if I can't get to know the characters very well, at least make me feel repulsed that they have died in a horrible way
Mm-hmm.
with some gore, right? In this one, they turn on the gore. There is a whole bunch of blood, dead bodies, mutilated corpses, all that. And I will say, I think it worked a little bit because there's no reason for me to care about these terrible men in this place who continue to be and threaten terrible things. And then they start dying. And the only thing that makes me go, ooh, I don't like that is how horrible their bodies look. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, kind of proves my point about the first film while also driving home how much of a waste of time all the prisoner stuff is in this film.
Yeah,
Like the only reason I was sad they died was because of how gory their bodies were.
right.
Like,
You know what would solve that? Not killing off the characters you introduced and saved in the last movie.
mhm,
That would help.
mhm.
That would help a lot.
It would help. And not resting everything on killing that one character that survives everything, and then I'm going to go ahead and assume you resurrect for the rest of your franchise.
You don't know that.
What's the title of the next film?
You don't know.
I don't know, huh?
No, you don't. You don't know.
I don't know the title.
I was so confused when I watched all these for the first time when I like binged them because I knew I figured I knew what they were resurrecting and I knew that she was in it and then I watched this one and I was like what what are we doing? What are we doing? And it's even more confusing if you look up the cast and see what her actual title is in the movie.
Okay,
Oh my
then I
god,
don't
it's
know,
weird.
but
Anyway, so yeah, that's Alien 3. I don't think it's all that good. Now, if you'll permit me, we're going to get into some of the reasons why. As I mentioned last week,
mm,
this movie could be a case study in studio interference.
okay.
It begins with Fox was having, I believe, just a rough go of it there for a while. They needed a hit, an immediate hit. So they announced the producers, like studio
Okay.
folks up at the top. They announced this movie and announced its release date before anything was greenlit, before anything was approved,
Oh,
before
no.
anything was done. And that resulted in a hellish experience for the director, which I will now elaborate on with our little notes here that I saved. So, let's get into it real quick. Here we go. At one point, David Fincher was denied permission by the film's producers to shoot a crucial scene in the infirmary between Ripley and the alien, where the alien menacingly closes in on Ripley. Against orders, Fincher grabbed Weaver, a camera, and shot the scene anyway. This scene not only appears in the final cut, but also featured prominently in trailers, and many regard it as the movie's most iconic shot, which has now been
Yeah,
replicated in
easily. I
Alien
recognized it.
Romulus. It's one of the coolest parts. That's just an indication as to what's going on here. The artists of
If
this
you had to
movie,
fight for that one shot, that is kind
yes,
of crazy.
the producers, they were useless. Not only were they useless, they hindered everything. So, furthermore, the film's production process was so chaotic and its reception by fans and critics so unfavorable that it nearly ended David Fincher's career before he ever had a chance to gain momentum as a director. This was his directorial debut because other people said no
Oh, that's
to it.
tough.
Yeah. But two things ended up saving Fincher from permanent movie jail. The first thing was Sigourney Weaver. Publicly and often angrily, she sided with Fincher against 21st Century Fox, telling journalists that the studio had made decisions that resulted in an impossible situation for the young director, and that he would have an excellent career if given further chances. The other thing was that producer Arnold Coppelson knew and didn't respect the management at Fox, and that was part of the process where he ultimately offered Fincher a new project a few years later. That project was Seven, 1995. I don't know what that is, but apparently it was a big hit, and it saved his career.
I've heard of that before.
Yeah.
Mhm.
First-time director David Fincher disowned the film, stating in an interview with The Guardian, quote, I had to work on it for 2 years, got fired off of it 3 times, and had to fight for every single thing. No one hated it more than me. To this day, no one hates it more than me, end quote. He cited constant studio interference during production and actually walked out when the studio rejected the initial cut and ordered extensive reshoots. He was not involved in the final cut, but his initial rough cut later became the basis for the, quote, assembly cut, a longer version of the movie released on DVD in 2003 and on Blu-ray in 2010. Although Fincher was asked to work on the assembly cut, he considered it, but eventually decided against it, giving supervising producer Charles D. Lazarica his blessing as long as it was not called a director's cut. With regards to the new version itself, he stated that he has no comments on it and he has never seen it. Now, in the early 2000s, when they did the box set of the 4 movies, each director, I think, I read somewhere it said they came back for a commentary, and he was given free reign to talk about the movie as much as he wanted and as badly as he wanted, and he didn't even do that. He wanted nothing to do with it. While offset,
he just wants to get away from it.
Yeah, well, it was a terrible experience. Moving on.
It sounds like it.
While offset, Sigourney Weaver had to wear a wig as her then 2-year-old daughter Charlotte didn't like to see her mother bald. $7 million had been spent on sets that were never used, thanks to the ever-changing script. Before filming had even started, with a deadline looming and the studio getting anxious to get things back under their control, they would call writer Rex Pickett almost daily with constant demands for changes. It got to the point that whenever director David Fincher wanted to discuss Pickett's progress on the script, he would let the phone ring twice, hang up, and call again, so that Pickett knew it was Fincher and not the studio harassing him. Even throughout filming, the script was so constantly being rewritten, with new versions faxed to the studio on a near daily basis. Cast and crew often filmed a scene and then learned the next day that had already been scrapped. That's horrendous.
You can't work like that.
No, you can't. Okay, this is a funny one, kind of. Although the alien that hatched from the dog was a rod puppet, early film tests used an actual dog in an alien costume. The dog was a whippet owned by one of the special effects people, which was used to be dressed up in a suit and muzzle. However, the special effects team thought the dog's movements made the alien look rather comical, so the idea was scrapped in favor of the puppet. They put a dog in a costume.
Yeah, the dog would look comical. It's not how the alien moves.
No, it's not. Anyway. Michael Biehn, this is Hicks, stated in an interview that he was deeply hurt that he wasn't asked to return as Corporal Dwayne Hicks, his character from Aliens 1986, but even more so that the film opened with Hicks immediately being killed off after escaping with the other survivors at the end of the previous movie. He stated he didn't mind Hicks dying per se, but objected to the careless way that they did it in this film. He therefore refused the studio permission to use a dummy of a corpse in his likeness, but allowed them to use a photograph on the screen. And I think I read it in here somewhere, he got paid more for that photograph than he did the entire role of Aliens. Get it, man. Get it. So in a moment as well,
good for him.
Yeah, I'm going to read an alternate draft. So there were lots of these, and not all of them were good. Some of them were fucking
Sounds like
insane.
It was constantly in progress.
Yeah. But this one kind of kicks ass. So there were versions of the story that had Hicks in it, but it seems like at the end, the final decisions, he was never involved, which is really upsetting. This version, though. No, sorry. One more and then that note. One of the main causes of the movie's troubled production, including script rewrites, crew replacements, excessive reshoots, and a budget that increased from $45 million to $65 million, was the fact that 21st Century Fox was in need of a commercial success. Alien 3 was greenlit by the studio because it was considered to be a sure hit, but the studio had already set a release date before a screenplay or even a story outline was decided upon. Director David Fincher later said that this lack of direction in the story was the source of many creative disagreements and productional difficulties, while he was trying to deliver the best possible film in time. However, the studio didn't seem particularly concerned with quality, as long as the movie was released and made money. Fincher also commented that his inexperience made things worse, since this was his directorial debut, and he did not have a successful film to back up his opinion, giving the studio and producers ample reason to ignore his input. Alien 3 was eventually released.
I understand this.
Yeah. Was eventually released.
It connects with the way that I do my job. Just the idea that like people tell you how you're supposed to do things, but haven't experienced it. You're new to it.
Yep.
So people don't trust your expertise, even though you know what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, continue.
Yes, this goes on to say that of course it kind of bombed in the US, but it made more money in Asia and Europe. Now then, William Gibson wrote one of the script treatments for the film, based on an idea from producers David Glear and Walter Hill, which was initially intended as a first of a two-parter to be shot back-to-back. As Sigourney Weaver's return was in question, Ripley would spend most of the time in a coma. The main focus of the story was on Hicks and Bishop, who are brought to a deep space station where scientists have begun experimenting on the alien cell samples, with devastating consequences. When a dangerous alien-human hybrid gets loose inside the station, Hicks launches the unconscious Ripley in a lifeboat safely into space, setting up the fourth movie, before he and Bishop lead a group of young Colonel Marines to evacuate the station. The first version was action-packed and included a battle between the Marines and a horde of aliens in a queen's nest and one of the station's outer hull. So an out-in-space on-the-hull battle. Because this was too expensive to produce, the second draft removed most action scenes and substituted the Marines for civilian survivors. Many consider this to be a much superior script. However, Gillier and Hill had hoped for more inventive ideas and wanted another draft. Gibson refused, citing other commitments and his frustration with, quote, foot-dragging on the producer's part, end quote. Geiler and Hill then canceled the second part, focusing on one movie instead. The only carryover for this original script is barcodes on the back of the convicts' necks, a relative lack of weapons on the station, and the appearance of company scientists. I don't know how you get from that to this and think that's more inventive.
I mean, it does sound a little bit more unexpected, I suppose.
I think that sounds amazing.
No, I agree. The plot you just read is far superior to the one that's actually in the film. I will note, the first two films put a really heavy emphasis on centering blue-collar workers and the non-typical protagonist for a sci-fi story. And I do feel like the prison continues that, but in a bad way. Rather than making normal people feel like they exist comfortably in a sci-fi world, you just like removed as many elements of the sci-fi as you could while still making an alien movie.
Yeah.
Which is kind of lame.
Yeah. There's another, I didn't take a screenshot of this one because it was kind of dumb. There's another version though where they ended up on like an artificially made wooden planet with just a straight up religious cult. And a lot of that was carried over into this version. But like, that's bizarre. A wooden planet.
It doesn't.
Like it was
nothing
built.
About that increases the interest with the alien. No. The alien-human hybrid, as disgusting and weird as that would be, at least progresses the story of the using the alien as a weapon, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
see, that's what I think. If you want to continue this idea, though, maybe not like real grounded people, but another perspective. You got blue-collar truckers, military men, then do scientists. Do the bookworms, do the nerds, do the people who are exploring the science and have not considered whether or not they should, only if they can. You know, Jurassic Park quotes.
Okay.
And have Hicks and Bishop
that's like
that.
highly typical sci-fi. That's highly typical.
We got nothing typical sci-fi. Anything typical sci-fi would be better than what we got.
Well, it would not continue the trend. You were predicting the trend.
My trend is a different perspective of our main group of people. Truckers, blue-collar folks, marine people, scientists. Not necessarily someone that can be related to by all viewers, but a different approach to dealing with the monster.
I see what you're saying. You're saying it's progression. It is a different subset, but I view the Marines as an extension of blue-collar workers. Yeah, they're soldiers, but they are largely grunts at the end of the day, whereas the ones making the decision are above them. See, scientists scientists, you could actually, it's interesting as you set this up, because I think you really could do like a grunt scientist character
Mm-hmm.
set and really emphasize that the ones on the ground running the experiments are often not the ones in charge of making the decisions,
Mm-hmm.
which is very non-typical for what we see in most sci-fi stories with most like scientists in those stories. They're usually one or two main scientist characters that get to call all the shots on the experiment.
Right.
Um, so it would be interesting to see like a functional company lab where the scientists don't seem to have a lot of control over their like what they're working on. I could see that working, but you would have to like make a point out of differentiating them. Scientists as a character set are very typical and normal for a sci-fi story. Same with soldiers, I guess.
That's fair. I do think there it could be cool to see Hicks being the military man that leads them though, keeps them alive.
Mhm,
And I don't
mhm.
know. That would have been fun. Last little thing here
Well,
I
and if you
have. Oh,
landed with if you landed
yeah.
with scientists, they could probably fix Bishop at least a little bit. So you
Exactly.
could
See, that
actually
was the
have an
other thing.
android.
This last bit is about the Bishop droid they built. It was so destroyed they couldn't do half makeup, so it is a
Mm,
robot, and it just didn't
okay.
work, and it drove David Fincher crazy. Like every take, it got worse and worse and worse. Like it wasn't operating. The one that ends up in the film, it's like a last minute reshoot, and it's like, let's see. At the time, it was the most sophisticated and state of the art motion controlled puppet ever used in a movie. I had to get to that point for the damn thing to work. So
Mm.
yeah, this movie, and this is why I kind of walk away somewhat bored. It's more interesting what happened outside of the movie than what happened in the
Yeah,
movie.
yeah.
And we've talked about this a little bit, not here on the show, but about Star Wars. I can't
Mm.
get bogged down too much with what it almost was, but I don't know if I can do that fully. When the story for your movie is a roulette spin, but at the end you still get to choose, and you chose this over the other options. I don't want this one, but
Yeah.
there was another script where they end up on Earth, and the xenomorph just gets to everything. We get xenomorph dogs, cats, cows, horses, birds, even a mosquito, and then
Better than
they
this.
all come together to form one giant mecha xenomorph. That's insane. It's weird. It's dumb. It would have been awful, but at least you're doing something. You're doing something. The most interesting, different
Yeah.
thing they did here is that it comes out of a dog.
Well, and I'm just going to be a broken record this episode because if at least they had made Clemens an android, then you would have had one more common thread throughout this whole
Uh
thing. Instead,
huh.
we dig Bishop out of the trash for 30 seconds
Mm-hmm.
of broken Bishop robot time.
Yeah.
And then that's it. I mean, that's that. And the fact that the alien is present in the story
Yeah.
is the only real sci fi element
Mm-hmm.
in this movie.
Yep.
And it got so far off genre. Now, it sounds like they were dealing with
A lot.
really difficult like outside the film problems, right? And so I don't think that this is an evaluation of anybody who worked on this film's skill, but as a film, it just doesn't really make sense.
No. And it's so bad that I forgot to mention. While this was being worked on, I guess something called the L.A. riots was happening. I'm not familiar with this period of history, but the fighting and the fires that were being started were making their way towards the building, which the negatives for this film were being held. And David Fincher really hoped that the building would have been destroyed. It wasn't, but he was hoping.
Mhm.
Also, it's not
Mhm.
made clear in the movie. It's actually confusing if you pay attention. Ripley was not face hugged.
Yeah, no, I followed that.
Right. So
So what
where does the
happened?
queen
How'd
come from?
she yeah.
Apparently, it is Newt that was attacked by the facehugger. But once she dies, the parasite crawls out of her and makes its way over to Ripley because it needs a living host to continue to grow, which is all kinds of weird and super strange. And I don't know why we felt the need to do that at all if we were going to kill Newt regardless.
Yeah, I mean, you can't just say that it magically appears in Ripley, but like that raises as many questions
Yeah.
as not having an explanation does. So
Yeah. A lot of people were confused as to where an egg comes from. I just kind of figured, in the 30, 40 minutes it takes to leave the atmosphere on the planet, the queen could have laid an egg on the ship. That's fine.
Mhm,
One or two.
mhm.
I'm not super upset about that.
And I mean, in my notes for the last film, I was like, I'm concerned that both Hicks and Newt have had direct contact with the alien in film in parts of the film that we haven't seen. So either of them could be carriers
Mm,
at this point. They don't do any body scans or anything at the end of the last film.
yeah.
So I was concerned that one of them was going to be a Trojan horse.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I keep forgetting. But this one is funny. For the reshoots, Sigourney Weaver was asked to shave her head again, and she didn't wanna. So she said she'd do it for $40,000. They said no. So they hired a guy who could make a really, 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 really good wig, bald cap wig. And he said he'll apply it and he'll do it, but for $16,000 each time he's required to do it. And he had to do it 4 times. So if anyone wants to do that math real quick, they could have made it a lot easier on themselves if they just gave Sigourney her just due. But they didn't wanna.
Dude.
This movie's a mess. It's really unfortunate. And I I understand that I don't understand how business works at the end of the day. I get that. I do struggle to understand as well, though, why you'd want to become a producer slash business person in the industry of movies if you don't like movies at all. Well, how do you know they don't like movies, Andrew? It's like, well, I feel like they'd give a shit a little bit about the quality of the movie and understand, even in the early 90s, that a movie that's good will do better than a shit one that should just rushed to
Yeah.
death. And this is a lesson that many studios still haven't learned.
Mhm.
That's insane.
I
Insane.
would actually really like to know. I'm sure there's a simple numbers answer for this, but I would like to know how bad franchises, I'll say, lacking nuance, but bad franchises continue to make a bunch of money,
Uh-huh.
and therefore persist. And again, I'm not totally looking at all the nuances here, but I would argue like the Transformers series is a bad franchise in the sense
Fast and the
that
Furious.
those films have never really made any sense. They have some cool CGI things going on, but literally no one would tell you that the plot of a Transformers movie is an awesome plot. They just go because they like the giant robots and the fight choreography. And that is a legitimate form of entertainment, right? So I'm not trying to knock that necessarily. It's just that they spend a bunch of money on those movies and they have very little storytelling artistry, we'll say, in them. They have other types of artistry and they make a bunch of money on them. But that sort of, I mean, even within that situation, there must be some leeway that they give their artists to allow how the story goes and like how they design the sets and the sceneries and the characters and how they cast people and stuff like that. And it doesn't require consistent rewrites on things. So I don't know. There's long story short, I don't see either how consistent involvement in a story or a film benefits
Mm-hmm.
producers. I would love to see examples of when an executive comes in and says we need to change some things and then it actually benefits the film, because
Mm-hmm.
like maybe there are some of those examples but you never hear about them because people don't complain about them. They're just like, that was good teamwork, it happened, right? So I don't know, maybe the MCU would be an example.
I think I don't know. It just depends because a lot of people would go to the MCU for poor studio involvement because of how often those movies are rewritten and the the VFX industry has taken such an unfortunate slog hit by the MCU
Hmm.
because they change things so often. So if we were to compare this to the MCU, it would not be in a positive way, I guess.
Well, I mean, I don't know, but like because the MCU is so connected, unlike other franchises, and it's so
Ah,
focused on continuity,
well,
it seems to me that there would at least be a few times where
yeah,
a director and a producer agreed that a change needed to be made, and the
yeah.
producer was the one that suggested it.
That's fair. That's gonna come back down to a different MCU feature, which is the cohesive world to begin with. And Fox, as we know, does not care about its connectivity
Yeah,
because it's not, it's different. If Marvel made movies about, I don't know, name it,
ghosts.
ghosts, just random ghosts, maybe they wouldn't care about that as much. Like it's Marvel Studios making Marvel movies. Fox is a studio that makes lots of different movies, and they clearly care about them all equally, which is like not a whole lot. It's the same
Hmm.
reason. It's the same issue that DC movies have had for forever.
Yeah. So weird that, I mean, maybe that's the greatest example of how turning a company or a product into a money-making machine actually strips it of its soul,
Mm,
where, like, we do use money and capitalism to make the world sort of like grease the wheels, right? Keep things moving in a smooth and coherent way, keep things with a valuable and consistent, like, sort almost like communication, right, with money. But the moment you centralize that is the moment you start losing focus on what you're trying to actually accomplish, and it very quickly becomes just a patchwork of attempts
mm,
to do what technically needs to be done so you can earn the dollar,
mm-hmm.
and that's disappointing.
It is. It is indeed. I do think, though, if we're about at our time, and if we were to end on anything, for
Mhm.
one, tis not a whale. But I think this is the worst one.
If this is
So
the worst one, then it's really
the
not that
the
bad.
next one, it might be debatable.
Okay.
I've only seen Alien 3 and Alien Resurrection once each, back to back. So I feel like there's more interesting things to talk about with Resurrection.
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
definitely a wild ride. So
Okay.
strap in. But then Prometheus and Covenant, well, not like the best thing since sliced bread. Again, there's like cool, interesting, artsy fartsy stuff in
Yeah.
Prometheus and cool horror and Covenant. Like there's cool stuff to discuss. I'm excited to watch those, and I think Alien Romulus is pretty dope, so that'll be fun. I think this is the lowest point of the marathon. I'm excited to keep going. Um,
Well,
unless you include, for whatever reason, the Alien versus Predators, because Alien versus Predator Requiem, horrible,
mm,
so bad. Oh, awful. The first one's pretty great, but that's a marathon for another time. Do you have any closing remarks on our third Alien movie? Almost halfway through this marathon now.
I have a closing remark.
Go right ahead.
Clemens should have been an android.
Okay. Okay. I get it. I understand. I
It's okay, yeah. No, but like, I guess
it
my
would have
final
been
thoughts
cool
on
with
it
him
are
being the
that
doctor as well, because he couldn't be infected by anything if he was an android.
and also it's a callback to the medical officer being an android. Anyway,
Yes.
um, but like kind of like an overall, just like looking at all three films so far, I have not been crazy about any of them. I did reluctantly give the second one a whale because I do think it is a good film. I'm just not, I know, I don't seem to be enjoying this franchise a whole lot from a personal standpoint. So in that sort of like platform, I guess, I am not disappointed in this film. I'm not like frustrated by this film. I just don't think it works. Right? Like I would also put it at the bottom, but with way less attachment to that placement. Just sort of like, yeah, this one goes underneath.
Fair. I am very interested to see what you say about next week. So that's us. That's done. Tis not a whale. Tis
No.
not a whale. It's more like
Tis an alien with a dog inside.
it's, you mean that reversed? You said
No, like no, an alien with the dog inside, like the alien puppet with the dog running around.
right. Yes. Oh God. Alien Dogception. Ugh. All right. Anyway, that's all.
All right.
Goodbye.
Bye, guys.